Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 8-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like. I know it's something silly as just leaving a like on a video, but it really does help me out, and I really do appreciate it. The more you guys interact with my content, leaving likes, leaving comments, and all that fun stuff, the more YouTube is going to recommend my videos to other people, and the more people that watch my videos, the more it helps me out. So I really do appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. It's kind of here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players that cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. You can also follow me on social media. I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, at CPenn16 on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, it's always much appreciated. We're over 300 members in there, also in the Discord chat, so it's always a good time every single day. So if you're interested, links in the description below. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. It's also the best time to sign up on Patreon because it's the beginning of the month. If you don't know how Patreon works, it cycles at the beginning of the month. So like I said, if you're interested, links down below. But let's dive into today's slate. And first thoughts on this slate, I think it's a pretty good one. We have lots of good pitching options, which is something I've been able to say in a while now. We've kind of been struggling with good pitching options for the most part. But we have plenty of aces on the slate. We have Jacob deGrom, Garrett Cole, Walker Buehler. We have some mid-range options, and we also have some cheaper options as well. So let's just start with the aces, and we'll start up top with Jacob deGrom. He comes in at 11,600. Now, his matchup is not great versus Atlanta. There's not an offense I really like to pick on, but you can say the same exact thing for Atlanta, where they're in a tough matchup where I don't want to use bats versus deGrom. And I'll side with deGrom in this matchup. In his first start of the season, he did go up against Atlanta. He only threw 5 innings and 72 pitches, but he struck out 8 of these guys and scored 26.1 fantasy points. So I think he is firmly in play here as your ace of the slate. Vegas likes him as well, 3.79 runs against him, 7.5 strikeouts. If you're looking at his numbers last season, they're obviously going to be elite. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball. Less than 1 home run per 9 innings, only a 29% hard contact rate, 32% K rate, 3.11 xFIP. His numbers were great, good versus lefties and righties. The matchup's not great versus Atlanta, but he already proved he could overpower this lineup in his first start of the season, where he only threw 72 pitches, and then he threw 88 pitches in his last start. So we're probably going to see anywhere from 90 to 100 pitches here, which is totally fine, and he can certainly get us 30-plus fantasy points if he's on his game. I'm not expecting 30-plus fantasy points, but he's certainly a safe bet on this slate. He's very expensive, but I still think he's a fantastic option. If you want to save a little bit of salary with Garrett Cole, I totally understand that. He was the best pitcher in baseball last season, and he was just absolutely dominant. He struck out 40% of the batters he faced, which is nearly half the batters he faced last season. He struck out insane. He also had a 43% K rate versus lefties last season. Now, the Phillies lineup, kind of like the Braves, they have a solid lineup. They have Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Rhys Hoskins, Didi Gregorius, Gene Segura. They got a lot of good batters, but again, Garrett Cole can just absolutely shut down any single lineup. Now, there's no Vegas totals out yet for this, and I just realized the heading for the Vegas does not say Vegas. There, I fixed that, but I'd have to imagine it's probably going to be around 8 strikeouts and probably less than 3.79. So I absolutely love Garrett Cole. He's expensive, but he's 600 less than Jacob deGrom, and he certainly has plenty of upside. He scored 24 fantasy points in each of his starts so far this season, and he also threw 102 pitches in his last start, meaning pitch count is going to be a non-issue with Garrett Cole. And if I can get pitchers in this early in the season that don't have any pitch count issues, they're going to be firmly on my radar. So definitely like Garrett Cole, and you get a little bit of discount off of Jacob deGrom. Now, Walker Buehler, he's a wild card here. I like his matchup versus San Diego, and Vegas likes him as well, but he only threw, I think, 58 pitches in his first start. Let me double check that really quick. 56. He threw 56 pitches, so I think he's a very risky play. I was looking on all the websites I could find, and was even looking on Twitter to see what his pitch count would be. I have not seen anything. I think we're probably going to get 70-plus pitches here. Now, he's 10,300, so he's discounted off the top-end guys, but I don't think his ceiling's as high because I am not sure how deep he's going to go in this game. If we knew he was going to go, like, around 100 pitches or 100-plus pitches, you could make the case as he's the best pitching option on the slate because San Diego last season versus righties, they struck out over 26% of the time versus them. If you just look at their splits versus righties last season, 26.2% K rate, 89 WRC plus. Now, they have a good lineup. I mean, they got Grisham, Pham, Tatis, Machado, so it's not like they're like a great matchup for pitchers these days, but they still struck out a ton versus righties last season, and Buehler had elite numbers last year, only a 5% walk rate, limited the hard contact with less than a home run per 9 innings. Did go up a 41% hard contact rate, but he limited the home runs. And near 30% K rate, 3.37 xFIP, 3.26 ERA. Obviously, elite numbers all around. But you got to keep in mind, or just got to keep on the lookout for a pitch count report, because if he's only going to go around 70 pitches, it's kind of tough to pay $10,300 for him when we can get 100 pitches out of Garrett Cole, who would have much higher of a ceiling. But I still think Buehler is somewhat in play. We just got to get an idea of what his pitch count's going to be, although I'm not too optimistic. But I threw him on here just because I like the matchup, and potentially if he's going to go deeper into the game, if he can get 5-6 innings here, I think he certainly has some upside versus the Padres offense that did struggle with the righties last season in terms of strikeouts. In Vegas, has him at 6.5 strikeouts, 3.52 runs against him. So I think he is in play, but I don't think he's nearly as safe as Cole or DeGrom because of the pitch count issue. Now, Alec Mills and Danny Duffy are only on here because of the wind situation in Chicago. Now, it's the night prior, so obviously things can change, but when I was looking at the projected wind in this game, it is going to be blowing like 20 miles per hour in. 20 miles per hour in. If you guys don't know anything about Wrigley Field, when the wind's blowing out, you want to stack the bats because it'll just carry the ball the way the stadium's designed. But when it's blowing in, it's going to majorly help the pitchers. So I think both pitchers are in play here as long as the wind is indeed blowing in around 20 miles per hour. I think when I looked, it was like supposed to be like 18 blowing in. That's a big boost to pitching. So I did throw Mills and Danny Duffy in here. It's not like they're like great pitchers by any means, and if the wind wasn't blowing in, I would not have them on here. But I certainly think they're in play just because of the projected wind. If you're looking at Mills' numbers last season, they weren't too bad. He had a 28% K rate, high ground ball rate at 50% nearly, 3.98 xFIP, a 2.75 ERA. Did struggle with lefties with only a 19% strikeout rate versus them and over a 200 plus ISO. But was great versus righties, and this Royals offense is just not something I'd be too concerned about. So I do think Mills is in play. Andy threw nearly 80 pitches in his first start, so I think we're probably going to get 80 to 90 pitches here, just depending on how he's pitching. He only struck out 3 going up against the Reds, but just because of the wind, I have him on here. If it wasn't going to be windy, or if the wind wasn't going to be blowing in, I probably wouldn't put him on here, but that does put him in play. And then two of my favorite SP2 options. Montas is my favorite, but I'm going in order by salary here. So Chris Paddock, he's 7,600. I hate the matchup versus the Dodgers. I really do, but he's pitching at home, and this Vegas total is very, very low going up against a Dodgers team, and we usually see one of the higher team totals on the slate. So he's getting a lot of respect in Vegas, and this one, only 3.98 runs against him, 6 strikeouts. He is an underdog, but he's also only 7,600, and Paddock certainly has some upside. If you're looking at his numbers last season, he had a 27% strikeout rate. Did struggle with home runs, 1.47 home runs per 9 innings, but there is upside for Paddock here, and this is mainly just a price play. And also keep in mind we have Coors Field slate again, so I'm going to want to be spending up for bats. So if you don't want to pay up for Garrett Cole or Jacob deGrom, you could go with these two SP2 options and Chris Paddock, Frankie Montas, Alec Mills, Danny Duffy, and then just load up your bats, because I'm definitely going to want to target some Rockies bats on this slate and even some Giants bats as well. But Chris Paddock, look, the matchup sucks. Going up against the Dodgers, they were arguably the best team in the league versus right-handed pitching last season. If you look at their splits, you'll see dark shades of green here for Chris Paddock. They had a 224 team ISO, 20% K rate, 116 WRC plus. Yeah, it's a little, the matchup for Mills is much better. Now, Mills doesn't have the same upside Chris Paddock does, but, oh man, it's a tough spot here for Paddock. But I like the respect he's getting in Vegas. And if you're looking at Paddock's first start, he threw 81 pitches in that game, and he scored 22.5 fantasy points, striking out 4. Then his next start, he went up to 89 pitches, striking out 6 versus the Giants. So we're probably going to see anywhere from 90 to 100 pitches here. And as long as he doesn't get absolutely shelled, I think he should be fine at this price tag, and he's mainly just trying to get us some Coors Fields bats. So I know the matchup sucks, but give up a couple runs, strike out some guys. And also Mookie Betts is day-to-day, I believe, with was it a finger issue? I forget exactly what happened, but he's day-to-day, so if he missed the game, obviously that'll be a boost for Paddock, because Mookie's one of the best players in the entire league. But Frankie Montas, he's 7,200. He's got to be one of the top pitching options on the slate, and it would not surprise me if he's going to be the highest owned, because just from the eyeball test, when I was just scanning the slate, I was like, well, Montas seems like an obvious play, and when that usually happens, people usually have the same thought process, and they end up being very high owned. So I can definitely see that being the case. And again, we're going to need some cheaper pitching options because we're not going to double spend up for DeGrom, Cole, because we need some Coors Field bats. So I'm not paying 20K plus for pitching. So I'm definitely going to be using one of these SP2s. I'm not sure if I'm going to go double mid-range at pitcher yet, or I'm going to go with an ace and then an SP2. But you guys know what I mean by an SP2, like one of these mid-range options. So we'll see. But I definitely like this spot for Montas going up against Seattle. Now I know Seattle's actually had some decent games so far this season, but they're definitely a team I'm not too scared of, and they did strike out a ton versus righties last season at 25.7%. And overall, not really the most exciting lineup in the world. Now, there's a couple of guys that have some bright spots, but for the most part, I'll start with Montas here. He's got a 26% K rate last season, a 3.47 xFIP, only 0.75 home runs per 9 innings. Good versus lefties, pretty good versus righties. He had a 29% K rate versus lefties, 22% versus righties, so better versus lefties in that department, but I think Montas is going to end up being pretty popular on this slate. In his first 2 starts, he's only went around 80 pitches, but at this price tag, I think it's going to be fine. So I definitely do like Frankie here. And then Danny Duffy, 6,600. Look, I really don't want to play Danny Duffy, but I threw him on here just because the wind's going to be blowing in, and it should benefit him. If the wind wasn't blowing in, I'd have some interest in these Cubs righties, but I don't really want to target an offense where the wind's blowing in 20 miles per hour at a park that really affects the hitting. So Duffy's okay. He had a decent start last time out, but I would much rather play Frankie here, to be honest. But this is pretty much just a weather play. I mean, he's got 21% K rate, but a 5.14 xFIP, and it's tough to trust him. And if I can just pay, 600 more for Frankie, I'll take that. So I think we can just move on to the bats now, but that's really the pitching pool I am looking at currently. And for the batters, I don't have as many guys listed here as usual. I think we only got like 20-something. I usually have almost 40, but it's a smaller slate. But starting with catcher, one of my favorite options in the entire slate, and I really like the Twins on this slate. They're going up against a soft-tossing lefty in Derek Holland, who absolutely sucks versus right-handed bats, gives up a ton of power versus them. And so last year, I would always use CJ Cron, Mitch Garver, and Nelson Cruz. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore because CJ Cron's not on this team anymore. He's on Detroit. But Mitch Garver, he absolutely smashed left-handed pitching last season. He could potentially be leading off as well, and especially when a catcher leads off. I mean, that's always great value because they're typically hit lower in the lineup. And he's only 4,400. I thought he'd be around 5K when I saw that Derek Holland was pitching against Minnesota. I was like, well, Cruz is going to be 5K plus. Mitch Garver's going to be 5K plus. That's not the case. Both are in this mid 4K range, and I think Mitch Garver is one of the best plays on the slate, to be honest. Minnesota's got an implied team total of 5.77. I honestly think that could creep up to 6 by game time. But if you're looking at Garver's splits versus lefties last season, 415 ISO, 198 WRC plus, 321 batting average, 198 WRC plus. That's almost JD Martinez-like numbers. He was that good versus lefties last season. If you're looking at Holland's splits, he was much better versus lefties than he was versus righties. Gave up a 324 ISO to righties over a 400 WOBA, high fly ball rate, double-digit walk rate. Now, he limited the power versus lefties, but that does not mean I'm going to be leaving lefties off in a full game stack here because the lefties that I'm going to talk about don't really strike out a ton, and Derek Holland doesn't really miss a lot of bats either. So I think the whole Twins lineup is in play here, but Mitch Garver specifically is a tremendous play on this slate. And he was really the only catcher I liked. So I feel like I'm going to just play Mitch Garver. We'll see, because I usually like to spend down a catcher, but I wasn't seeing any value catchers that popped up the page. If one pops up that's like near bare minimum and going to make the order, I don't hate punting catchers, so I think that's totally fine. But James McCann, if he makes the lineup, I'm not sure if he's going to, but he's 3,700, and he's going up against a lefty who just absolutely has an extremely low strikeout rate. He does not miss bats whatsoever. And Brett Anderson, he had a 9% K rate versus lefties last season and a 12% K rate versus righties. Like, the guy just does not miss any bats. He had a 161 ISO to righties last season. James McCann hits lefties very, very well. He had a 132 WRC plus versus them last season, and near 300 batting average and near 200 ISO. So if you're not playing Mitch Garver, I really like McCann as well, and I think you can stack up these White Sox once again. Then dropping down to first base, we have Brandon Belt, 4,800. So the Giants are in Coors Field, so they're going to get that Coors Field price jump because we usually know the Giants are one of the cheaper teams on the entire slate. Now they're one of the more expensive teams on the entire slate. But they get a huge park upgrade in Colorado. San Francisco is one of the worst hitters parks in the league, but now we're going to the best hitters park in the league in Colorado, which teams just absolutely smash there. They have a team total of near 6. Like it's only 5.92 right now, but that's probably going to get above 6 by game time because that's usually how it seems to go in Coors. But I definitely like this game. It's one of the top options on the entire slate, San Francisco and Colorado. I prefer the Rockies side of the plate just because they're a better offense overall, but I mean, these lefties on San Francisco do grade out pretty well versus Chi-Chi. If you're looking at Brandon Belt's numbers versus righties last season, I mean, he's not like an amazing, but 427 slugging, 242 batting average, 186 ISO. If you're looking at Chi-Chi's numbers versus lefties, 231 ISO given up, only a 15% K rate, 16% walk rate, 362 WOBA. We're in Coors Field. Brandon Belt certainly makes sense. Daniel Murphy, 4,500. I believe he double donked yesterday, if I remember correctly, but I know he had like 4 hits at one point. But yeah, definitely like everybody on the Rockies here. I'm not really that scared of Johnny Cueto. I barely have any. The sample size is so small if you're looking at this. If you're looking, I mean, he's got a 520 ISO, getting up to lefties, 446 WOBA, but he barely pitched last season, so you can't really look too much into it. But definitely prefer the lefties versus him. But literally everybody's in play. I mean, if you have a Rockies uniform on, you are certainly in play on this slate. Sorry to pause really quick. I forgot what I left off, but I think I just got done talking about Daniel Murphy. Coors Field definitely makes sense. He's got good splits versus righties. Jose Abreu, he comes in at 4,200, and Brett Anderson just has no ability to miss bats, and these guys should be able to make contact. And Jose Abreu's got some pretty good splits versus lefties. I do think you could do a White Sox stacks here. Now, there's no team total out yet, but I'd have to imagine it's going to be decently up there. I don't think it's going to be nearly as high as the Rockies or the Twins or the Giants, but I still think it could reach above 5, if not close to it. But if you're looking at his numbers versus lefties last season, he had a 360 batting average, only a 17% K rate, 232 ISO, 168 WRC plus, elite numbers all around. So I like the price tag on Abreu, and if you're stacking up some White Sox, I think he definitely makes some sense. And then if you need a value option, we have Ryan O'Hearn. He's 2,900 going up against Alec Mills. I said I don't really target batters in this game because the wind is just blowing in very, very hard. But I like the price tag. Mills was worse versus lefties last season, and O'Hearn does have some pop versus righties. So I threw him on here as just a value option, but I don't expect much from O'Hearn whatsoever, especially if the wind is indeed blowing in as hard as it's supposed to. Dropping down to second base, we have Ryan McMahon at 4,700. I like everybody on the Rockies going up against Johnny Cueto. I think the lefties are an overall better spot, but you can target the righties as well. But if you're looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching last season, he had a 342 on base percentage, 247 average to 88 WRC plus. Not the most exciting numbers in the world, but we're in Coors Field, and anybody in Coors is certainly on my radar. Then we have Robinson Cano. He's only 3,600, which I think is a pretty good price tag. Going up against Mike Soroka. Now, Soroka is not a bad pitcher, but he has a very low K rate versus left-handed bats if you're looking at his splits. Only a 14% K rate to lefties compared to a 24% K rate to righties. 137 ISO given up compared to a .078 ISO to righties. So if you're going to use anyone versus Soroka, I prefer the lefties by far. But, man, Vegas does not like the Mets in this one. Only 4.2 runs for their team total, and I don't really want to target too many Mets, but I do think the lefties are decent one-offs if you need some salary savings because they're not that expensive for the most part. And then we have Nick Madrigal, sorry, messed up his name, but he definitely has some upside here. He's only 2,800. I do have some interest in this White Sox stack, and you get that righty on lefty matchup, and he actually got his first career hit yesterday, so hats off to him. But again, Brett Anderson has an extremely low K rate, so I think everybody on the White Sox is in play here, especially the righties. But yeah, we're not going to have any big league splits on him because he's only played a couple of games and can't use that as a sample size. So I definitely think he's in play at only 2,800. Then we have Adrianza at 2,600 on the Twins, and I pretty much like everybody on the Twins. I think you can play lefties. I think you can play righties. I obviously prefer the righties versus Derek Holland, but they'll get to the bullpen at some point, and either way, Derek Holland is not a great pitcher versus both sides of the plate. He certainly limits the power versus lefties, but not someone I'm really going to be too scared of. And if you're looking at Adrianza's splits versus lefties, he's got a little bit more pop, a 154 ISO, 105 WRC+, 270 batting average. Just the numbers are pretty similar to both sides of the plate, but he does have a little bit more pop versus lefties, and I like this entire Twins lineup. He's also dirt cheap, so I certainly think he is in play. Then we have Nolan Arenado at third base. He comes in at 5,500. Very, very expensive, but if you have the salary, I like spending up for Nolan because he crushes lefties, he crushes righties. We're in Coors Field. The Rockies have a team total of over 7 right now, which is going to be by far the highest on the slate. And we also have the other Coors team at only 5.92, so I definitely think the Rockies are the top option in the slate, but they're also very, very expensive. So it's going to be hard to just full stack these guys, but I don't mind picking a lot of these guys just as one-offs in my lineup. Then dropping down to another Coors Field bat, we have Pablo Sandoval. He comes in at 4,600. And if you're looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching last season, he's better versus lefties, but still we're in Coors Field. He did have a 232 ISO versus righties, a 259 batting average. I mean, not exciting numbers in the world, better versus lefties, but pretty much everybody in Coors Field is in play today. Then Josh Donaldson, I'm hoping he plays, but he has not been in the lineup. I'm not sure if he is, but if he is, he's definitely a top option for me. Arguably might be the best option at third base over Nolan Arenado just based off of salary, because he's only 3,900, and he would be hitting near the top of the order on a Twins lineup that I think absolutely crushes Derek Holland today. So just keep a lookout on the injury status from Josh Donaldson, because if he's in, I absolutely love him. I think he's going to be one of the better plays on the slate, but as of right now, have no idea. Then dropping down to his teammate Marwin Gonzalez. He's eligible at third base and in the outfield, and he actually has better splits versus lefties. And I like all the Twins here. They have a team total of around 6, and this Twins lineup's obviously loaded. I mean, you got Josh Donaldson when he's playing. You got Nelson Cruz, Mitch Garver, Eddie Rosario, Max Kepler. I mean, it's a very deep lineup, and they can hit pretty much any pitcher. We saw them get to Mike Clevenger, and he's a very good pitcher. So definitely like all the Twins here. Derek Holland is not someone to be scared of. If you're looking at Marwin Gonzalez splits versus lefties last season, he had a 300 batting average versus them, a 106 WRC plus. Not fantastic numbers in the power department, but he's really cheap and on a stack I really like on today's slate. So he is certainly a play. And like I said multiple times, Holland really does suck versus righties. Gives up a ton of hard contact, ton of fly balls, and a ton of power to right-handed bats. Then going down to shortstop, there's not really any shortstops I like on this slate. Trevor Story is the number one clear option, but outside of that, it gets a little bit gross because Polanco is much worse versus lefties compared to righties, but I still think he's in play. But same with Trevor Story. He smashed right-handed pitching last season, was actually better versus them in the power department with a 264 ISO, 550 slugging, and near 300 batting average, 377 WOBA, 360 on base percentage. Cueto, you can't really look at his splits because there was a very small sample size last season, but it's Coors Field and everybody's in play here. The Rockies have over a 7 implied team total. If you're wearing a Rockies uniform, like I said, you are 100% in play. They're just very, very expensive for the most part. Then Jorge Polanco, he comes in at 4K. I like using him versus right-handed pitchers. Versus lefties, he will struggle. If you're looking at his splits last season, a 270 batting average versus them, which isn't terrible, but that's compared to a 306 batting average versus righties. 153 ISO compared to a 207 ISO, and just overall the numbers are much worse for the most part. But I like everybody versus Derek Holland here. I mean, righties smash him, and the Twins are one of the best options on the slate. He's also only 4K, so I'm not going to shy away from the lefty on righty matchup here for Jorge Polanco, even though he does have worse splits versus them. But I like the price tag, and I definitely like the Twins on the slate. I would not leave Polanco off full stacks. And shortstop, it looks like it's going to be a pretty weak position on this slate, so if you can save some dough on it, I don't mind that. But if you're not, I mean, spending up for Trevor Story definitely would make sense because I think the position's not very good for the most part. Then if you can go all the way down, we have Lurie Garcia here at 3,200. If you're looking at his splits versus left-handed pitching, it's not great, but it is better than it is versus righties. He's pretty awful versus righties. Does .084 ISO, 71 WRC plus, 348 slugging. Numbers get a little bit better versus lefties. He's got a 311 batting average versus them, 131 ISO. Not a big power hitter by any means, but pretty good batting average versus them, 110 WRC plus. And Brett Anderson, like I said, just does not get any strikeouts. Only 9% versus lefties, 12% versus righties. So these guys should be able to make contact, and I do think they make for a decent value stack on today's slate because for the most part, they're not really that expensive. And then going down to the outfield, we have some Giants and Rockies for the most part. I think for like the first 4 guys. But we'll start at Mike Yastrzemski at 5,300. Again, everybody in Coors Field is in play for the most part, but I do prefer the lefties versus Chichi Gonzalez. Now, he is super expensive, so I'd 100% rather play Charlie Blackmon at 5,700. I am not sure why Yastrzemski is more expensive than Charlie Blackmon. Doesn't make much sense to me, but he's still a fine option. He's definitely going to be much lower owned than Blackmon and Dahl because, I mean, it feels pretty gross paying $6K for a guy in the Giants, and they have a team total of less than a run or more than a run lower than the Rockies, so it doesn't make sense to pay a lot more for Yastrzemski than it does for Charlie Blackmon. But he is certainly in play here. If you're looking at his splits versus right-handed pitching last season, he had a 249 ISO, pretty good, 505 slugging, 256 batting average, 114 WRC plus. Chichi's numbers versus lefties last season, double-digit walk rate, 15% K rate, 231 ISO given up. It's Coors Field. He is certainly in play. But Charlie Blackmon, he comes in at 5,700. Definitely like him on the slate. If you have the salary for it, he definitely grades out as one of the top options for sure. Just super expensive, but I do like the lefties versus Cueto. If you're looking at splits versus right-handed pitching last season, 255 ISO, 387 WOBA, 125 WRC plus, 318 batting average, only a 15% K rate, Charlie Blackmon is obviously an elite play on this slate if you have the salary. Same goes for David Dahl. I'd prefer Charlie Blackmon because he's got more power upside, but Dahl was fine versus righties last season as well, a near 300 batting average. 25% K rate's a little up there, but still overall solid numbers, and I don't really have to go too in-depth here, guys. It's just Coors Field bats, and they're all in play. Same goes for Alex Dickerson. You're getting a lefty on righty matchup, and if you're looking at his splits versus righties last season, he had a 288 batting average, 122 WRC plus, 345 WOBA, 222 ISO. Kind of a similar play here to David Dahl, but David Dahl's on the better offense on this slate, in my opinion, but both are fine options, but I will give the edge to the Rockies bats here. And then we have Aaron Judge, who is just on an absolute heater. I don't love the matchup versus Arrieta because he's someone I want to use lefties against, but he's hit, 6 home runs in the past 5 games. He's just on absolute fire. He's hit homers in 5 straight days. So when a guy's on a heater like Aaron Judge, who can just absolutely just rip the cover off of baseball because he's just an absolute monster of a human, I don't want to fade that too much. Now, I don't think you have to go there because in cash games, I would much rather play Nelson Cruz and I'd try to get up to like a dollar Blackmon. But if you want to use Aaron Judge and stay on that hot streak, I totally understand that. I don't think he's necessary for cash games. Arrieta is tougher on righties than he is versus lefties. If you're looking at his splits versus lefties, you're going to see some pretty awful numbers. But versus righties, he actually had some decent splits. Only a 6% walk rate, 21% K rate, and obviously much less power given up. And if you're looking at versus lefties, only got a 15% K rate and you had a double-digit walk rate. So I prefer the lefties versus him, but Aaron Judge being on an absolute heater, I did have to list him just because of that. But Nelson Cruz, he is one of the best plays in the entire slate, probably my best play, and I'm going to be darn sure he's in my cash game lineup. I know I hate saying things like that the night prior because things can change, but I don't see how Nelson Cruz isn't the best play on the slate. He's going to be the thumbnail for this video, and he's only 4,500, and I like the Twins going up against Derek Holland, and Nelson Cruz is one of the best lefty smashers in the entire league, and Derek Holland sucks versus right-handed bats. So if you had to pick someone to get a homer in this slate, I think Nelson Cruz is by far the best option, and he's only 4,500. I would have interest in him if he was near 5,500, to be honest. You can make a case for him over Blackmon easily. So at 4,500, I think he's in a tremendous play. I expect him to be one of the highest owned bats in the entire slate, but he crushes left-handed pitching. If you're looking at his numbers, 783 slugging, 322 batting average, 461 ISO, which is insane, 195 WRC plus. Cruz is an amazing play on this slate. I don't think I have to go too in-depth on there. Derek Holland sucks versus righties. It just makes too much sense. And then Aaron Hicks, 4,400. I said I prefer the lefties versus Arrieta. I already mentioned the splits, so I don't have to repeat that again, but he's much worse versus lefties. And Aaron Hicks is much better versus right-handed pitching. You're going to see dark shades of red and orange for him versus lefties. But when you look versus righties, he's got some respectable numbers. Now he has a 30% K rate nearly, but 261 ISO and some decent pop. Only a 218 batting average, but I like Hicks versus righties, and Arrieta does struggle with the lefties, so I think he is firmly in play. Then you also have Max Kepler. He comes in at 4,100. Now I think people are going to stay away from these lefty-on-lefty matchups, but if you're stacking the Twins, I don't think it's the best idea in the world to leave off guys like Max Kepler and Eddie Rosario because they certainly have plenty of upside. Now, while Derek Holland is strong versus lefties, he only allows a, 0.051 ISO to lefties, only a 19% K rate. But these guys don't strike out a lot, even versus righties and versus lefties. Kepler only has a 14% K rate to lefties, and Eddie Rosario only has a 14% K rate to lefties. So they should be able to put the ball in play. And if they can put the ball in play versus Holland, the ball typically can go pretty far. So I'm not going to shy away from the lefty-on-lefty matchups here. I still think they're fine. They're fine, especially if you're game stacking the Twins. Would I play these guys in cash games? No, because I don't love the lefty-on-lefty matchups, but they're going to get to the bullpen at some point, and it still would surprise me if they did some damage versus Holland. So I like both. They're pretty much the same play to me. But Kepler's numbers versus lefties last season, they were still pretty good. 231 ISO, 130 WRC plus, a near 300 batting average. So I still think he's fine in tournaments. I wouldn't go there in cash games, but I like him in tournaments, and Eddie Rosario is pretty much the same play there. But Kepler does have some more juice versus lefties than Rosario does. Then we have a couple White Sox to end this video. We have Eloy Jimenez. He comes in at 4K, and I do think the White Sox make a somewhat interesting stack on this slate. Brett Anderson just has like zero ability to get strikeouts, and they should be able to make contact. And these guys have plenty of power. They strike out a lot, but they definitely have a lot of power, and they're going up against a really low K rate pitcher, and they're also in Milwaukee, which is a decent hitter's park for the most part. So definitely like some White Sox here. Eloy Jimenez actually has more power versus righties, but he's still got some decent pop versus lefties as well. So I think he's fine. Then we have Robert, 3,900. Should be leading off here with Tim Anderson on the shelf as of right now. So again, I like all the White Sox for the most part, going up against a low strikeout pitcher in Brett Anderson, and Roberts actually been doing not too bad so far to start the season, so I think he is firmly in play leading off at 3,900. But that's pretty much it. A couple of other guys I already talked about are eligible in the outfield that are cheap. Marwin Gonzalez, also Lurie Garcia, who's also on the White Sox, and probably a couple of other guys I missed that I didn't put in the player pool. But as of right now, these are the guys I'm looking at. So hope this video was helpful, guys. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. Follow me on the social medias. If you want to support me on Patreon, links in the description below. But that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoy baseball tomorrow and have a great start to the week.